to VPG's Virtual Water Cooler Chat podcast, a platform that celebrates the rich tapestry of professional diversity, with a particular emphasis on empowering women. We aim to foster diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA, for all, while recognizing and championing the achievements of everyone as a central pillar of our journey. In our conversations, we explore a wide spectrum of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives, creating a vibrant mosaic that enriches our collective understanding and strengthens our commitment to diversity and empowerment. Today, we had the pleasure of chatting with Jeremiah Chan, the Director and Associate General Counsel, Head of Patents, Licensing, and Open Source at Meta. Our podcast episode is titled Breaking Barriers. Jeremiah Chan on legal advocacy. Jeremiah and his team are responsible for Meta's worldwide patent portfolio, intellectual property transactions, and open source software, as well as industry-wide efforts to promote greater diversity, equity, and inclusion in innovation and the IP profession. Meta's approach to patents and innovation is described in this blog post, and Jeremiah and his team have launched several industry-wide DEI initiatives, including the Diversity Pledge, ADAPT.legal, and the Patent Pipeline Program. His team has been featured in IAM Magazine. Prior to joining Meta, Jeremiah led an international team at Google that was focused on patent portfolio strategy, operations, and data science. And before Google, Jeremiah served as head of IP for JDSU, a global supplier of broadband and optical solutions. Jeremiah started his career in private practice with the law firm of Fish Neave, where he specialized in litigation, opinion work, and client counseling. He graduated from UC Berkeley with highest honors while working as a marketing assistant at the University of California Press, and he received his JD from Cornell Law School, where he also worked in its legal aid clinic. Jeremiah serves on the executive board of the National Council on Patent Practicum, NCPP.org, and the advisory boards for the Institute of Intellectual Property and Social Justice, IIPSJ.org, the Institute for Inclusion in the Legal Profession, the IILP.com, and the High Tech Law Institute at Santa Clara University School of Law, law.scu.edu/hightech. He previously served on the USPTO's Patent Public Advisory Committee, the American Bar Association's Task Force for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and as chairman of the board for the Bay Area Anti-Trafficking Coalition, BAATC.org.
Jeremiah, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be on Virtual Water Cooler Chat. Really good to finally see you, I guess, virtually.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're going to get started. Can you share the story of the young Jeremiah when you're growing up in the States?
Sure. I was born in Illinois, immigrant parents originally from China, and we grew up in a small rural town about an hour and a half north of Chicago. When I grew up there, it was pretty much surrounded by farmland all around me. We were the only Asians probably within a 50-mile radius, and there were very few people of color. So I have two older brothers, and we experienced a lot of racism because people had never seen people that looked like us. We had some good friends who lived on our street, an immigrant family from Italy, and they had 3 boys and a daughter, and we kind of teamed up with them to kind of form our own little gang. We protected each other, we fought together, and that was kind of my childhood. In some ways, it's been very interesting as I've gotten older to unpack my childhood, if you will. Sometimes I think about this famous short story called Flowers for Algernon, where, I don't know if you've heard of it, but basically this man named Charlie, he's living his life, but he has some kind of medical issue where his IQ is very low. And so he's happy-go-lucky and he's enjoying his life. And then he's given some medicine that raises his IQ. And he suddenly sees his life from a very different lens and realizes that people who were his friends actually weren't his friends. They were making fun of him all the time. And it just was a completely different reality than what he had been living. In some ways, I feel like that's how I view my childhood, which is, at the time, I enjoyed it very much. My 2 older brothers were kind of my heroes. I looked up to them. The immigrant family from Italy were great friends, and we had each other's backs, and we fought a lot, but I didn't think it was a bad thing. There were lots of things that I just didn't realize in terms of discrimination, racism, that were happening constantly that I just didn't know. And so when I kind of think back on it now, I'm not sure how I was so happy. We got into lots of fights almost on a weekly basis. Kids would often steal my lunch, take my lunch money, all sorts of racist attacks that we experienced. And even at the time, there were lots of things that I didn't even realize, some of which I've talked about in other interviews, about seeing my mom washing the aluminum siding on the side of our house. And she was basically washing dog poop that neighbors had thrown on our house to basically tell us, like, get out of here. We don't want you here. Had no idea at the time. I just thought it was kind of the thing to do on the weekends, clean your house with a hose. And I also think back to school plays. There was one play in particular I remember where a bunch of the neighborhood kids discover a dinosaur in their neighborhood. And so at the time, I remember enjoying it very much, crawling onto stage as a green-faced dinosaur and seeing a whole crowd of people laughing and thinking, wow, I'm entertaining this audience. It's great. When I think back now to being the only Asian kid in that class, right? The only non-white kid, and multiple times being given the role of an animal with no speaking parts. Didn't really realize what was happening there. I think I do now, but there's a little bit of flowers for Algernon going on where someone has given me medicine to take another look at my childhood and realize what the reality was.
I can kind of relate on that because my family came from Hong Kong. My parents decided to come to Virginia because we have family. My grandparents were and uncles, aunts, they were all in Virginia. We came in the 80s, and one day my dad met up with some of his friends from Hong Kong, and they were like, you don't want to raise your kids in big city. They might join the gang. Okay. And then they got my parents to go to Lawrence, Kansas, middle of nowhere, except that there's a university. And there were definitely some discriminations. One of my family members was assaulted. And I've never really talked about it. And those are the things that sometimes you become so desensitized, especially when you actually witness and just kind of don't know how you deal with it because you barely speak the language. The first day that I was in my math class, I remember I was in junior high, and then the kids were like throwing paper plane at me. And I couldn't defend myself because I didn't know how to speak. I know how to write. It was Hong Kong, I got good reading and writing, but I was so self-conscious and I could not speak and definitely could not defend myself. And I have two brothers. They're both younger. So as the eldest, you're kind of like trying to figure it out. And my parents has decided to open a Chinese restaurant. And so we had to cover. The boys like to go out and play. So I kind of got stuck and helping because they're much better at getting out than I was. So I ended up trying to balance between schoolwork and restaurant work. And eventually I graduated with my undergrad and my master's degree. And in other interview, I've talked about how some of my mentors actually helped so much because in some way, it's hard to be growing up in the Midwest when there's not a whole lot of cultural diversity. But in other ways, I was very lucky that it was a college town and I was very much surrounded by the scholars in the community, especially those who teach East Asian languages and cultures. It happens to help that my parents have a Chinese restaurant, so they come to eat. So they're surrounded all at the restaurant. I'm really glad that you were so honest about the discrimination part of it because it's so difficult to talk about, especially when you're young and you're trying to figure out exactly what part of it, why are people being so mean? So how do you think having that experience shape Jeremiah? Because that's not a very typical Chinese name either, right?
Yeah.
I've only known like maybe two other Jeremiah in my life. One of them is my brother's best friend in Lawrence, Kansas. So who named you Jeremiah? Your parents?
My parents did name me. It has become a little bit of a tradition in the family to go with Old Testament prophet names.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of started with my grandfather. Long story short, because it could take up the entire podcast, but during the communist takeover, both my dad's family and mom's family essentially escaped from mainland China. My dad was from a place called Jiangsu, and my mom was from Hunan. And both of their families escaped. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was actually a colonel, a supply colonel in the army. And after he fled to Hong Kong, he was, essentially jobless. New place, didn't speak Cantonese. He and his family had to find a way to earn a living. And he ended up meeting a Lutheran minister, converted to Christianity, and started attending a seminary in Hong Kong. And he basically gave biblical names to his three sons. So my father's name is Daniel, and then my two uncles are Samuel and Moses. And that has kind of carried on because my two older brothers are Micah and Jonah, and I'm Jeremiah. So Old Testament prophet names have continued to carry on. And then even to the next generation, my kids, I have two boys and a girl. They are Elijah, Ezra, and Emanuela. My nephews are Noah, Joel, Judah, and Jordan. So you can see lots of
Wow.
names through several generations now.
That is quite interesting because I was like, the Asian American actually named Jeremiah. Very unique. So thank you for sharing that. If you had to describe yourself in 3 words, what would be those 3 words be?
That's a good question. I would probably say the first word that comes to mind would be foodie. I think it relates to your story about opening up a restaurant. So many families from Asia do this, right? But I also think there's something deeper there, right? I do love food, all sorts of cuisine. Can't get enough of it. That's a problem of mine, actually. But I also think that for many Asian families, food is our love language. I know for my father and I, one of our favorite things to do is to go out and try new cuisines. I can tell you for my mom, it's cooking. Now, these days, especially for her kids and grandkids, even to the point of where sometimes it causes arguments because we'll go to her house and she'll just be in the kitchen for hours and hours. We won't even see her. And then it's time to leave. She's serving food. I was like, we didn't even get a chance to spend time with you. I was like, why are you? We can just order food. And she will not do it. And I think over the years, I've started to realize you have to let her do it because that is the way that she exemplifies love. That's the way she shares love.
This is also how they connect. I mean, this is how they connect. Like my mom does that. She was like, "Don't order out. Just gonna cook," and she makes really good scallion pancake. So I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do when you're not here because I don't know how to do it. The restaurants just don't do justice. So I
No,
have to try.
yeah, that's the special ingredient. Why your mom's food tastes so good. It's like, what is going on? Like the restaurant food doesn't taste like this. There's a special ingredient of love that
Yeah.
goes in, and you can't replicate it. So foodie is number one. I'd probably say the second one is committed to a fault, meaning once I commit to do something, I'm kind of like a rabid dog. Like I just won't let go. Like I'll bite and then I just, no matter what you do, I won't let go. One of the frequent examples I often cite is over the years I've had lots of friends say, "Let's work out together." New Year's resolution, let's work out together. And the joke I often make is if I agree to do it with you, I'll be doing it for the next 5 years. And this other person that I've agreed to do it with will like quit after 3 weeks. But I'm in it for the long haul. And I feel like that's true for a number of areas in my life, different programs and different things I've started. I feel like once I do it, I'm in for the long haul. And it's probably true to some extent, even for jobs I've held, right? Like almost every company I've been at, it's been like 6+ years. And at least in Silicon Valley, I know that the average kind of tenure at different companies before, especially legal professionals move, is somewhere around like 2 years. Much shorter period in which people kind of look to other places to move around, whereas I stay for a while. And I think that's part of the commitment that's just kind of built into me. The third one, to get a little more deep with you, the third one I would probably say broken. At the core, I acknowledge and confess that I am a deeply flawed person who has made lots of mistakes. And despite that, I know that I'm still loved and accepted by friends, family, and God. And that's one area where my faith is very, very important to me. My faith in Jesus is a really, really important part of my life. And I know for me, for a long time, I was trying to rely on my own strength to be a good husband, good father, good friend. And I have realized over time that I can't do it on my own strength. I can't do it on my own. And it took me a while to kind of figure that out and to realize that there's actually a lot of freedom and connection through vulnerability, through brokenness. And so I would say broken is probably the third. I actually brought a book today that's relevant to this question. It's a book called Just Mercy by one of my heroes, Bryan Stevenson, who is the founder. He's a lawyer and also the founder of this organization called Equal Justice Initiative. But the book is great if you haven't read it. It's called Just Mercy. They also made a movie out of it featuring Jamie Foxx and Michael B. Jordan.
Oh,
Very good movie, excellent movie. But there's a quote in this book that really kind of speaks to me, and it speaks to brokenness. But let me read it to you. It says, "We are all broken by something. We have all hurt someone, and we have all been hurt. We all share the condition of brokenness, even if our brokenness is not equivalent. Our shared vulnerability and imperfection nurtures and sustains our capacity for compassion. We have a choice. We can embrace our humanness, which means embracing our broken natures and the compassion that remains our best hope for healing. Or we can deny our brokenness, forswear compassion, and as a result, deny our own humanity." Bryan Stevenson.
wow, that's really deep. I have been actually reading other books, From Strength to Strength, where he talks about like the different phases of people when, like, especially on success addiction. Like people that are actually in very high intellectual career, like medical and lawyers too. And basically doctors and lawyers, a lot of them are really driven and win that next case. A lot of times it's the material things. And at the end of it is like, sometimes do you honestly feel fulfilled? And he also talked about fluid versus crystallized intelligence. Have you read that? Okay, it's actually quite interesting because he was talking about like fluid intelligence is when we're young. We're much quicker. We do our math questions faster. We solve problems faster. But then at some point you hit the second phase, this phase of crystallized intelligence where your experiential learning, like all your life experiences, sort of give you the glimpse and you solve those type of problems better, right? So that's one of the things that I was thinking about. I was actually talking to one of the coach. He was like, why do you want to help the next generation so much? For you, I really want to thank you for being so transparent and authentic about broken being one of your words, because I don't know too many people will be so open in saying that, especially for Asian Americans. That's the image issue. You know, everybody was like face, man, and everything. And I thought for the longest time, I'm sure that I have not been the best manager at some point because I didn't know how, right? You know, I knew most people get promoted because they are good at their job. But once you become a leader or a manager, you're no longer being like evaluated based on your own performance. You're being evaluated and assessed based on your team's performance. So how do you actually inspire other people to do their thing? So I think crystallized intelligence, according to Arthur Brooks, is using like your experiential learning and basically help other people that are actually still in that fluid stage. So I think that's one of the reasons that may explain the exponential growth of BPG. And I spend so much time talking to my young ones. I call them, because I don't have any kids. So I was like, those are my kids. And I just thought that part of it is, I went to a women business conference and one of the business executives was asking me, why do you want to do all of this? And the word legacy has come up. Now, in the past, you know, I'm just struggling to make a living. So you don't really think about anything that noble about legacy. So I just thought that I wanted to share that part with you. Since you're sharing Bryan Stevenson, okay. Bryan Stevenson, Just Mercy. Well, another one for, do they have Audible?
I'm sure they do.
I'm going to read that, listen to that. Next question is, why did Jeremiah become a patent attorney?
Yeah, that was a bit roundabout. I actually decided to go to law school to become an environmental lawyer. I studied environmental science in college. I minored in conservation resource studies. I think it was a little bit ahead of my time. I mean, we still have climate change deniers today. Think about back in the 90s when people were like, why are you even studying that? Whereas I was thinking, I think this is going to be really important for our future. I audited some law school classes when I was in undergrad at Berkeley and met a couple of environmental law professors who were working on really neat things like pollution permits and how to kind of cap the amount of pollution in certain regions. And that's what I decided I wanted to do. So went off to law school, started studying the law and joined the Environmental Law Society. But then as I started looking at job opportunities, it was kind of the opposite of what I wanted, especially thinking about all the significant law school loans that I had incurred, right? I mean, really the only jobs that would be sustainable for me would be working for oil companies. That is not what I wanted to do. And so kind of had to make a pivot. And I think this is probably true for a lot of people. Life doesn't always go as you plan, but had taken a lot of science classes. I mean, my whole family are kind of a family of scientists, professors of chemistry, physics, microbiology at different universities. My two older brothers, one's an MD, another one is a neuroscientist. So very hardcore science backgrounds throughout my family. And so a lot of the question in my mind was, all right, I have my environmental science background, took a lot of science classes. How can I leverage some of the STEM that I've taken in a profession? And IP was kind of the clearest choice to me. I was fortunate. I had a couple of really close friends in law school who were on the patent law path. I didn't really know much about it, but they were very passionate about it. And they told me all about why I should do it as well. And here I am. So it's turned out well.
Good thing that you have friends in proximity there's in patent law.
Yes, for sure. For sure. But it's interesting how people find their ways into intellectual property. And I think this goes to a lot of the organizations that I've been a part of, which is making sure that everyone has access to the IP profession. I think so many people have never heard of it. They don't even know it's a viable career path. And so even though we may think, the country may think it's available to anyone, it's really not. And so hopefully we can raise awareness and make sure that it is accessible to everyone.
That's a great segue. Let's talk about what is your view on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and how those organizations that you are very involved in your opinion, that would help bring some equity to the underrepresented communities?
I would say the first thing is, if I think about DEIA, what does it mean to me? I would say at its core, it's kind of a fundamental acknowledgement of the systemic inequality in our society. And what I mean by that is acknowledging and understanding and recognizing the long history that we have in this country of laws, institutions, and policies that have explicitly discriminated against certain people in the country. Only certain people were allowed to own property, only certain people were allowed to have citizenship, only certain people were allowed to marry certain other people. I mean, all these different laws and institutions and policies that existed. And even though some of those laws, most of those laws have been repealed, there's still that legacy, that thinking that lasts for a long time afterwards. And I think that's the first thing I would say, which is it's acknowledging that there is that inequality that our country is essentially built on. And I know this is part of why lots of groups out there want to fundamentally look at education system and make sure that we're teaching the truth. We're teaching the actual history of this country and not kind of hiding and avoiding some of the ugly truths about the founding of our country. So I think that's the first thing. But I think the second thing is, as a part of acknowledging that systemic inequality, realizing that rooted in that history is why today we still have things like the gender wage gap, why we still see that power and privilege and wealth is in the hands of very few and not other people. This is all the byproduct of this systemic inequality and the historical roots of it. And so I think at the core, that's what it means to me. And then I think the second step is then once you realize that, once you acknowledge that, then what are the steps we can take to actually address it?
Well, you talked in another podcast about the comfort zone radius, CZER, and I wanted to know how you implement that as part of the matter DEI culture.
Yeah, so comfort zone radius is it's a concept I have to give proper attribution. So it's a concept that was introduced to me by a mentor and a coach that I had named Reggie Butler, fantastic coach on how to train leaders to be more inclusive. And so a lot of practical lessons learned from him around trying to create a more inclusive workplace for my team. I think something we often talk about, lots of organizations, is the need for greater diversity. And we know there's a lot of research out there that also shows that the more diverse a team is, the more effective they are. So I feel like that's pretty non-controversial at this point, right? Like the proof is out there, the evidence is out there. And so we all know diverse teams make for better teams. But I think what we don't talk about often enough is once you build a diverse team, now how do you keep them? And this is something that we hear often from organizations that hire more diverse candidates, but then those diverse candidates leave after a short period. And it's because they don't know how to create an inclusive workplace for them, to have a place where those diverse candidates can feel safe, they can feel heard, they can feel empowered. And so a lot of my focus with my coach, Reggie, was how do I become more of an inclusive leader, right? I've really had not much training in this area. Read a few books, but don't really know much about this. One of the tools that he introduced me to was comfort zone radius. And I still remember when this came up. We had an optional social virtual gathering of my team. And this is kind of where we just all get together on Zoom and we just catch up on life and vacations and restaurants and, nothing formal, but just catch up with people and get to know each other better. Having built a very diverse team, especially for IP, we're now, I think, 77% BIPOC, 45% female to male. And of our senior leaders on my team, I think several of whom you know well, including Mike Binns, we have, all 4 people of color, and then 2 are female, 2 are male. So we've really been quite intentional about making sure we've built a diverse team because we know those are better functioning, more effective teams. But the second part is then how do we make sure that we have an inclusive culture? And so being such a diverse team and getting together, we often have these collisions, if you will, friendly collisions where you have people sharing stories that are educational for others that just can't relate. And so one story that came up was one of the African Americans on my team mentioned his interview process for Meta and how when he was interviewing, he was told by a few people on the Meta team that he already knew, hey, you don't need to dress up in a suit. We're very casual here. I mean, look, polo shirts, T-shirts. I mean, that's kind of the dress code here. So you don't need to be in a suit. And his response was, I'm showing up in a suit. So when it's time to interview, I'll be wearing my suit, tie, and I'm essentially going to ignore the advice that I've been given. One of the white males on our team was incredulous. Why would you do that? The black male on the team just said, I can't afford not to show up looking professional, even one time. The stakes are too high for me, for a black man. And again, the white male on the team just didn't really understand. So they kind of had their own conversation in the midst of our team. And it was a productive conversation, but essentially the black male on the team was saying like, the standard and expectations are very different. And the white male on the team was saying, that's never even crossed my mind. Like I have never dealt with that. It's never even crossed my mind in that I've never had to think about the scrutiny and the standards that are imposed on me. And so I remember having a session with my coach, Reggie, sharing this with him and almost sharing it with him in a giddy way, saying like, look how safe my team is. This is great. And his response was, oh man, it was a look of disapproval. And so I was saying like, what's going on? Like they feel comfortable sharing this. And his view was, as the leader, are you paying attention to how pleasant was it for the black male on your team to relive this trauma, right? Do you think it's pleasant? Do you think it's a pleasant experience for him to have to repeat this every time someone asks him about why are you doing that? And what are you feeling? And what are you experiencing? He shouldn't have to feel obligated to do that. And so in the course of talking about this experience and him saying like, you got to watch out. You can't just let people run loose and have these collisions without anyone doing the work behind the scenes. And so I asked Reggie, I said, what's the work that you're talking about? And that's when he introduced this idea of comfort zone radius, which is essentially a circle. Think about a pie with 4 quadrants. And the 4 quadrants are my lived experience, others' lived experience, knowledge about the topic. In this case, it would be DEI, let's say. And then the 4th is relationship depth. And so his point was, for each of these quadrants, in order for people to move into areas of discomfort, that's what you need to do in order to build an inclusive culture, every member of that team has to be doing work on their own as well, increasing their level of knowledge and familiarity with each of those 4 quadrants, right? So my lived experience, in this case, for the white male, he knows that. He knows his lived experience. Does he know the black male's lived experience? Probably not, unless he actually tunes into podcasts, read books about Black Americans and what it's like to be a Black male in this country. Topic knowledge, again, has he read up on DEI issues? Has he read up on, what marginalized groups feel and experience? And then finally, what is his relationship with that Black male? If he asks these questions, does he know he'll get the grace because they already have a relationship set where that Black male knows that the white male is coming from a place of safety, honest curiosity? And so the point of the CZR is that every member of the team is investing time into building the 4 quadrants so that when we get together as a team, we can create that safety to actually have those collisions with almost a safety net to say, we want to learn from each other. How do we help uplift the awareness, knowledge, and empathy that we have as a team so that we can get to a point where every member of the team feels safe, heard, and they have a voice? And so I hadn't really thought of it that way. And I think for a lot of teams who don't have these kinds of learnings, don't have these kinds of tools, what happens, Ashley, is that microaggressions happen, right? Like people don't have bad intentions, but they offend people unintentionally, right? People have hurt feelings. They will not speak up again. They don't want to have to relive trauma of discrimination and racism, but they're asked to again and again. And so these things happen because you're actually not doing the work on the back end to prepare for these constructive collisions so that they end up being destructive.
And the reason why I asked you about this comfort zone radius is that I had a sort of a conversation with one of my really good friends. She is white. And so one time I was on a committee and I think I was supposed to put together a panel. And I said that I'm going to be the POC. My background was in construction litigation before, so project management, POC is point of contact in those days, right? But it's also mean people of color or person of color. So when I told her, I said, yeah, I'm going to be the POC for this particular panel, she was like, why would they pick you? And we were not on the same vocabulary. And then I was like, are you questioning my knowledge? I mean, I've known her for years, but are you questioning my knowledge? And she goes like, no. And at some point she said, that's so like racist of them that to put you, a person of color, to be like in this particular panel. I'm like, I didn't even know what to say at that point. So that's one of the reasons why I was very intrigued when I listened to the podcast when I did my study about the comfort zone radius. So thank you for explaining.
I'm happy to. I will tell you another example that your story kind of raises is I think about in the time after the death of George Floyd. Talking to many of my friends, people of color who are friends, and especially like Black individuals who I'm friends with, telling me how many calls they got from white colleagues and friends asking them, I feel so bad. What can I do? What can I do? And I remember I was on a group call with one of my female Black colleagues, and people on the call, a number of people, non-Black folks, were saying, what can we do? And almost like with exasperation, my female Black colleague just said, just do the work. And that's kind of stuck with me because for a long time, I was just like, what does that mean exactly? I'm not sure, because I think a lot of the people asking, they mean well. They want to help.
Yes.
They don't know what to do. And I think for me, this tool, the CZR, was the first time I actually got in a very tangible way, here is the work, right? Read up, increase your knowledge about DEI and the lived experiences of marginalized communities so that when you enter in these conversations, you're not starting from scratch. You're not saying, Ashley, what can I do? How do I understand? You're coming in saying, I've read a lot of books. I've listened to a lot of podcasts. I know a lot about what's going on, but I'd love to hear more about your lived experience if you would tell me. And it's almost like that invitation is very different than I'm putting the burden on you to educate me each and every time. That's not fair, especially not fair for marginalized people.
And then also, I think that when it applies back to the depth of the relationship, it really, really has to do with how close you are to someone. So obviously, I wouldn't, I was like, what are you talking about, But I had a relationship with her. This is the same person that when my dad died, I knew that, like, I was in an emergency room and I text her. I said that, this is happening. And she goes like, which hospital? And then within 30 minutes, she showed up. So we have that particular relationship, and it didn't really matter what the color is. And it's like we both can actually have a little bit more discretion so that we can actually forgive each other for our ignorance sometimes, We only have a few more minutes. What advice, practical advice, do you have for the next generation who are interested in joining the STEM career, either legal or otherwise?
I would say, if it's really something you're passionate about, don't give up. You'll probably face a lot of obstacles. Don't give up. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is really invest in building your network. I just think about all of the different DEI champions that you and I know of in the industry. There's so many. Many of them mentor other people who are, just starting out in the IP profession, who are interested in it. And just finding a relationship, starting to build a relationship with any one of those can make a world of difference. I would say, I'm wearing a pin today, NCPP.
I knew that you were going to say that.
Creators of the patent pipeline program. That is a great start. If you don't know how to get started, they teach patent prosecution focused on women and people of color who have STEM backgrounds. Everyone I've talked to didn't even know patent prosecution was a career path. And now we've got 11 plus people who are actually professionals working at law firms as technical specialists, making a very good living and being involved in careers that they absolutely love, utilizing their STEM backgrounds in the patent field. So the patent pipeline program is a great one. ADAPT.legal is another great program. You just go to that website, you can see all sorts of different programs, but also find administrators of those programs who will talk to you, who could potentially mentor you, all different ways to immediately start building your network. I think that's a big part of it. And then continue to leverage those relationships to look for opportunities and continue to plug in.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jeremiah, for all of the wisdom. I really enjoyed it. I will talk to you later and have a wonderful day.